Welcome to YouTube XVONE. Up for critical review is Jordan Maxwell interviewing Lloyd Pye on the origins of mankind. Please like and subscribe. Thank you.
All right, this is Jordan Maxwell again, and today I have a very important guest. I need to say first that I've been around the world and I've heard so many people over the years, and people who want to be authorities on different subjects, and I've become so jaded over the years hearing so many people who are supposed to be interesting, and it turns out to be very boring. And so I'm not really too impressed with people, and so somebody has to be really doing something important for me to get impressed. And I first met Lloyd Pye, who is my guest tonight, in Egypt. He was a speaker with me in Egypt. That was back in, what was it, about 1999, I think. But Lloyd I didn't realize at the time, his subject matter was so important to me, but I was so concerned with what I was doing, I wasn't paying much attention to what Lloyd was going to be talking about. But since then, I have come to understand that Lloyd has got some incredible information, and that's why I've been wanting to get him on the show. His name is Lloyd Pye. You go on the web and simply Lloyd, L-L-O-Y-D, last name P-Y-E, and extraordinary research into extraordinary subjects. And I'm very impressed, and I'm really delighted to have Lloyd with me tonight. I'm assuming I have Lloyd with me tonight. Are you there?
Yes, I am. I have to tell you, Jordan, that's one of the best introductions I've ever had, and thank you very much for it.
Well, then why don't we just end the program right now, and that's it.
It can't go anywhere but downhill after that.
So I'm fascinated. I know a lot of people know all around the world your name in relation to the skull, the star child skull of an alien skull, which in itself, to me, is absolutely incredible, because science... today, what we call science is actually, in fact, a religion. They have their sacred holy books and their saints and their popes. And so science is actually a religion, unfortunately, in the world today. But there are a few scientists who are real scientists and people who are actually doing something phenomenal in the scientific world. And in relation to UFOs and aliens and those kind of subjects that Lloyd and I and so many other people are interested in, science will say, well, why don't you give us something we can actually look at, we can actually test. Well, Lloyd has a skull, and all you got to do is, if you're a scientist, is look at it. And so I learned a long time ago that most scientists are not willing to look at anything they didn't find. If their university didn't finance the dig, and they found it for the university or for themselves, they're not interested if somebody else found it. So that's why most of science is not interested to talk about something really important, because it's outside of their expertise. They don't know anything about it, and they're not going to make money off of it, so therefore it doesn't exist. Well, I got to tell you, Lloyd Pye has done some incredible research on not only this star child skull that he can talk about a little bit, but especially on the origins of the human race and how we are put together and where we came from. Because I've been talking a long time about the fact that God in the Bible, Lloyd, I'll tell you something. Many years ago, I was talking to a very high-ranking rabbi in the United States, and we were talking about this subject, about mankind and where we came from. And he said to me, he said, nowhere in the Bible does it specifically say God created man. It doesn't say that. He said, go back and read the thing correctly. It says God, which is incidentally not one God, but Elohim, more than one God. That's why it says, come, let us. In the Bible, God says, come, let us. Who is us? And so he said, you've got to look at that. Who is God when he's talking to us? And he says, come, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Jews and Christians will then say, well, there it is. See, God is creating man. He said, no, go back and read the sentence and break it down correctly. What is being said here is that gods, more than one, Elohim, are saying, come, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. He's not making man, he's remaking man. Come, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And so that started me thinking. This was back in the 60s. And so I've always been interested in, where did we actually come from? Because remember, God is simply the word dog spelled backwards. And if you want to talk about God, you better look at the universe and see how big it really is before you go telling me about God. However, there is something to this idea that we have been genetically modified or mutated, so to speak. So that's the subject I really am interested in, what Lloyd's work has done. And I was absolutely amazed when I first heard him over in, what was it, Laughlin, Nevada, I think the first time I heard you.
Yeah, Laughlin.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your findings on that whole subject of how and what we are and how we were made?
I tell you what, it's one of my favorite parts of the research that I do too, frankly, although, as you said, most people know me for the research with the Star Child skull, but I did, for the most part, I was a hominoid researcher, hominoids being Bigfoot, the abominable snowman, Yeti, like that, and there are 4 kinds of those, and they dominate around the world. And I know that as soon as you say that to people, and they say, "Oh, he believes in Bigfoot. Geez, you got to be crazy." Not true at all. But that's what started me down the line. But after about 20 years of that, I absolutely knew that everything that science was professing about human development on Earth wasn't true. We did not descend from what science calls prehumans, because if you look at every prehuman up to Cro-Magnons, which are us, which appear about 200,000 years ago, every one of those has a completely different cranial physiology from us. They have these big round night vision type eyes, they have flat foreheads, they have these big wide splayed noses, they have mouths that stick off their face, they have no chin. Everything about that kind of skull design follows from the earliest of them, the upright bipedal primates, right on through up till the Cro-Magnons, and suddenly, boom, 180 degrees in every one of those aspects that I just mentioned, including the rear of the head changing as well. So you have all of those fundamental, profound changes in the skull virtually overnight. So I could see that something happened around 200,000 years ago with the Cro-Magnons, but I had nothing that I could believe, nothing that made sense to me. And then in about 1990, I read the work of Zecharia Sitchin, The 12th Planet. And suddenly I could see, oh, this makes sense. This is scientifically valid, because it verified everything I was believing up to that point, but I had no mechanism to explain how we got here. And suddenly I had a mechanism, genetic engineering. Wow, could have knocked me over with a feather. Of course it made sense. And when you got to know certain aspects of the human genome, you see that it can't be anything but that. All other primates on Earth, that's chimps, gorillas, right on down, all higher primates, I might have said all primates, all higher primates have 48 chromosomes. Humans, who ostensibly descend from a common ancestor with chimps 5 to 8 million years ago, we have 46. So what happened to a whole chromosome from each parent, 2 whole chromosomes per human? That's an awful lot, when in fact the difference between us and chimps is about 3% in our total genome, and about 5% with gorillas. Could be even 2% with chimps. You get different numbers all the time. But the point is, we have all the same chromosomal material, but we don't have the same number of genomic material, but we don't have the same number of chromosomes. So how could that be? Well, it could be because 2 of our chromosomes, the second and third, have been fused together. Fused. Now, science says, well, nature can do that. Of course, their answer always is nature can do anything. When you box scientists into a corner and anything that they can't explain, well, nature can do anything. Just like when you do that to religionists, and you're right. I mean, absolutely, I agree with you 100%, Jordan. Science has become a religion. It's absolutely no different than the religious dominance of thinking 500 years ago, where 500 years ago they would do anything to shut up dissent, and their method was to just burn you at the stake. Can't do it now. You and I would be gone long. We'd be ashes a long time ago.
Oh,
they
yeah.
could still do that.
No doubt about it.
So what they have to do is they have to minimize your impact by ridicule and by ignoring and all of the things that mainstream science does when somebody comes up with something they don't want to hear and they don't want to deal with. But nonetheless, those two chromosomes in humans are fused, the second and third. And they're fused in such a way that they magically still work. You have to understand how a chromosome is built. On the ends of each one, there are things called telomeres. And in the middle of each one, there are things called centromeres. And the centromeres are what attach to each other when chromosomes begin to split and make another chromosome, another copy of itself, which is going on all the time. And the telomeres are the endpoints. Now, to fuse two chromosomes together, the second and the third, you've got to have the telomeres of the end of one on number 2 and the end of one of the ends on number 3 has got to be removed. You can't have the stop points still in there. There has to be the chromosomes have to still flow one to another. They have to be able to communicate. They can't have the telomeres in there. Somebody's got to slice off those telomeres. And then once you fuse them back together, one of the centromeres has to be shut down. You can't have two centromeres working on one gene because it'll go absolutely nuts. It'll create a spider web. So guess what? That's exactly what humans have. We have the telomeres nipped off and the two chromosomes fused together, and we have one of our centromeres shut down so that the whole chromosome will work and split itself apart like it's supposed to. Lo and behold, what a miracle. Oh, it's a miracle. Nature can do anything. Wow. Yeah, right. So anyway, that was done in a lab. And also there are 8 or 9 other places in us, in our chromosomal package, where we have what are called inversions. Now imagine this, 8 or 9, I can't remember now. It's been a long time since I've talked about this because I always talk about the star child, but nonetheless, you can look it up. It's in my book, Intervention Theory Essentials. Intervention Theory Essentials, all of this, clear illustrations, can't miss it. What they do is they go into one of our chromosomes, they make a cut top and bottom of a segment in the chromosome, pull it out, flip it over end to end, put it back in, and fuse it back together. And it works. But now you have segments that are flipped. Now, science again says, well, nature can do anything. If it's done, if it's there, nature did it because nothing else is allowed. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. It's so clear that we've had genetic engineering done on us. Now, let's talk about Sitchin for a moment. Sitchin wrote, based on his interpretation of the Sumerian texts, back in 1976. Understand that his book was published, The 12th Planet was published in 1976. Get that in mind. And in that book, he talks about this exact genetic engineering that I'm talking about, of not just humans, but all domesticated plants and animals. But let's focus on humans. And he said that according to the way the tablets laid it out, it looked like that the humans were created in southern Africa, in the Abzu, to be slaves and servants, starting out with the slaves to work in the gold mines, about 200,000 years ago. Now, when the book came out, he was just roundly criticized, ridiculed. 200,000 years ago, please, every scientist, everybody in the world knew that humans had descended from chimps somewhere between 5 and 8 million years ago, and there was absolutely no doubt about that. How could this man, this ignorant economist, say that humans were genetically engineered 200,000 years ago? It was ridiculous. He was laughed off the stage, right? 10 years later, 1986, 10 years later, scientists began to understand by looking at mitochondrial DNA of humans, which comes down strictly from females. So that means you, me, everybody listening to this, male or female, we carry the mitochondrial DNA of our mothers. Okay. Now, in our cells, we have nuclear DNA and we have mitochondrial DNA. The nuclear DNA is the whole ball of wax, the chromosomes we were talking about earlier, all 46 chromosomes in each nucleus in our cells. Floating outside are little bitty chips from hundreds to thousands of these little circular power plants called mitochondria. And they each have 16,569 base pairs. 16,569 if you're normal. And it's extremely well known and understood because the number is so small. And they know that the maximum humans carry of mutations in that amount is about 120. And guess what? The maximum, the 120, comes from guess where? Southern Africa, exactly where Sitchin said the first of us began. So that's number one. Then number two, when you clock it back to see when we begin as a species, when you're going back from mother to grandmother to great-grandmother, clocking it on back and figuring out when the first of us had to appear, guess what? Right around 200,000 years ago. Right around 200,000 years ago in Southern Africa, the first of us began, according to our mitochondrial DNA. Well, that's what Sitchin said 10 years earlier and was laughed off the stage for it. And there he was calling his shot, like Babe Ruth or Joe Namath or anybody else. 10 years later, was he any apologies offered? Of course not. He was forgotten by then. That part of it was. So at that point, you have a huge, huge battle in the scientific fraternity between the archaeologists and the anthropologists who insist that there had to be the common ancestor with the chimp. Obviously, you can't have us just appear out of nowhere in 200,000 years. That's going to make somebody believe this Sitchin idiot is correct. So, but the geneticists say, no, we've done it way too many times. We know we would not say something like this. We wouldn't say something this volatile if it wasn't true. There has to be an answer. What is the natural answer for this? And they put their heads together and they eventually reached a truce, and the truce is this: genetic bottleneck. There had to be a genetic bottleneck at 200,000 years ago that somehow wiped out all of the pre-humans, all of humans, at about 200,000 years ago, leaving only a few breeding pair left alive. And lo and behold, they were all in Southern Africa, and lo and behold, they all managed to find each other and start breeding again. And so that explains why it looks like we only start at about 200,000 years ago, because of this great dying, this great wipeout that left only a few breeding couples, when in fact there is not a shred of evidence, not a shred of any kind of catastrophe, worldwide catastrophe, at around 200,000 years ago. Everything in the fossil record, everything in stratigraphy looks like nothing really serious happened anywhere at any time. This is the way science plays its game, Jordan, and you know it, and everybody out there ought to know it. Science, and I say this routinely, science makes us, those who would challenge them, play the game in their hometown, in their home stadium, in front of nothing but their home fans, on their field, using their ball, their rules, and their referees. And we got to suit up and play against that. But that's how it is.
That's right.
That's just what we bite off when we challenge them. And here we sit talking about how unfair it is, but there it is.
Yep. Well, that's the same thing with banking and insurance and government and God knows everything else. The big corporations and the big monstrosities of power. And if you're going to speak truth to power, well, you're going to be playing on their field, and you're going to be in trouble. But that's the way truth is always. What was that? Alfred North? Whoa, I can't remember his name. The theologian said that truth forever is on the scaffold and wrong is ever on the throne. The basically is that truth is always being belittled and ridiculed, etc. But that's the way it's always been. We're fighting a battle between light and darkness, between intellectual enlightenment and the dark ages. And so, as far as I'm concerned, with the religion and governmental systems around the world, that's what we still are. We're still in the dark ages, and by their fruits you shall know them. Look at the way the world's acting. You can tell we're all in the dark, fighting each other. And there's so many lies and corruption, but this kind of knowledge is going to get out eventually for those who need it, for those who can handle it. So that's why I think this work of yours is so important, because it's really based on facts, not religion.
Right. Well, I totally agree that it's going to get out there. There are too many of us now that are working, and I think doing good work on on a wide range of issues that need to be covered and need to be looked at. One of which is what I do, but others like you do your work, and there are a few dozen of us that are doing serious work. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that are doing what I consider ridiculous stuff, and I know you know that as well as I do.
That's what I said in the beginning, that there's so many people out there, wannabes, and who class themselves as experts, and then you listen to them and you fall asleep. They don't know what they're talking about. Once in a while, I'll come across somebody that I'm really impressed with, and that's why you're on the show and they're not.
Well, I thank you for that.
Yeah, I want only the best of the best for my show, so I start off with you. And so that's interesting. What else? Because, I was in business with Zachariah Sitchin, and I sent him to about 5 different countries. And that's a whole interesting story, too. I had a lot of time to sit and talk with Zachariah. And a lot of interesting things he never told the world, never got around to telling. And some of them he said, I'm never going to tell you. So,
wow. Well, you should write a book about that.
Yeah, well,
sounds like a good book.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about it, and I thought, no, I better not say anything, just leave it alone. But anyway, I'm really interested in this idea of who created us, and also what's going on, do you think, right now with this, with this whole other world presence that we know is around us? What do you think is going on with us in relation to an extraterrestrial intelligences in the universe watching us?
Well, I think, frankly, my position is that they're just waiting for us to kind of grow up and acknowledge that they're there and stop being so
childish,
provincial, so backward, so. To me, we're like, relative to them, we're like infants crawling around on the floor with dirty diapers.
You're right.
And we need to get to the point where we stand up and acknowledge, at least go into childhood or adolescence, where we acknowledge that they're there. We know you're there. We know you're a lot better than we are. We know you could help us. We'd appreciate it if you would. We're making a mess of this place. We don't know what to do. We need help. Please give us some help. And if we get to the point where we can do that, maybe they'll come down and help us. That's how I see it. I don't think that we're like lab rats, I think, in the level of our intelligence and sophistication. Not every person on the earth, of course, obviously not, but collectively, we're nothing to be respected. How could they respect us with the way we are?
Well, I always say it as a joke, but people will ask me, well, if there are aliens here, why don't they come down here and talk to us and show themselves? And to which I always say, look, I'm human like you, and I don't even want to be seen in your company. Why should I?
So true.
I don't even want to talk to you myself.
Like you,
So why would they want to come down and talk to either one of us? I mean, when was the last time you sat down at an anthill and tried to explain Einstein's special relativity theory, and tried to show them all the documents and all the paperwork on it to explain to them? They don't even know you're there, and they couldn't care less what you're saying. So I think that's the way the creators are watching us. We haven't.
I don't think we're exactly to the scale of lab rats, and that's a little overstating it. But I do think we're to the scale of lab chimps or lab monkeys. Okay. They just simply can't have any respect for us at all, collectively as a species, and with what we're doing to the planet and what we do to ourselves, war and all that. Till we get our house in order down here, how comfortable could they feel trying to talk to us? We'd probably try to shoot them out of the sky if they did that.
That's exactly
They'd have to come down. Anybody that would make an appearance to us would have to come down and absolutely dominate us. Come down and say, look, we're going to just kill you all if you don't straighten up and fly right, or something like that. It's not a good way to start a relationship if you're going to do that. You got to be dealing with someone who can talk to you sort of halfway at your own level in your own terms.
Yeah.
Otherwise, one dominates the other, and it may be that someday we will unfortunately meet some of the aliens like we see in some of our most terrifying science fiction movies. but I like to think it's going to be like it was with E.T. or that funny one recently. I forget. With
whatever.
two British guys.
Well, even
Paul, yeah, like that. Yeah, just nice guys, kind of like that. I would hope, because I think there are all kinds out there, like there are down here. I think there can be some negative ones out there, and I don't think we want to fool with them any more than we have to, simply because they could do very bad things to us. I mean, look, let's be realistic. People ask me a lot, well, do you think they're going to hurt us? Do you think they have any bad intention toward us and all that? Well, if they did, it wouldn't. There's nothing we could do. All you have to do, Jordan, all you have to do is look at our genome. Get one of us. Look at the human genome. Find one spot in there where one pathogen will kill that species and nothing else. Some area of our genome that in that 3% or in that 5% that doesn't overlap with chimps or anything else, just ours alone. Find that, pick out the weak spot, develop a pathogen or introduce a pathogen, whatever, that'll kill based on that hole in our genome, and it would take every human out and leave everything else alive, and you could just start over. If anybody wanted to do that, if they have the capacity to come here, I would think genetically they would have the capacity to do that. So yeah, I think there's nobody out there really wanting to do us in at this point.
Yeah, but look at the Black Plague of Europe. Sitchin in his discussions or his books that discuss the Anunnaki and that link to gold and the mining and potentially genetically engineering a better human race to mine for the gold and whatnot.
Well, you really, I think, used a very bad term there. Not a better human race. They didn't do that. They were trying to dumb down the Adamu. They were trying to make us physically weaker and substantially dumber, way, way, way dumber than them. They wanted a being with their bodies, basically, that they could have sex with and produce offspring with. But they didn't want their mind in our head. They wanted us to be really, really stupid so that we could take instructions, we could go off and do what we were told to do, and we could come back and report that it was done, and what do you want us to do next?
Sounds like the public school system.
They weren't trying to make a better human. They were trying to keep us down and keep us stupid, which they did. They did a very good job of that.
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, they did a monumental job of that.
Yeah, and they're doing it today with all the poisons in our food and the public school system.
Well, I was going to say, we call that whole system that he's talking about public schools.
Well, I mean, yeah, look, when you're going to create a slave and a servant, the one thing you don't want is for it to be as smart as you, as strong as you. You want it to be inferior in every way you can structure that being. And if you're going to make one and you're going to sit down and you're going to blueprint it out, these are some of the things that it had to have. We want them to look like us in our image after our likeness. We want to be able to have sex with the females because there's 600 of us here and most of us are men, and you got problems when you have males, hardship duty, middle of nowhere, got to have some girls, and then you want them to be able to take instructions, do the work, but you don't want them to collectively ever be able to gang up on you, physically or mentally. That's how we came out, and that's how we are to this day. And you can tell that. You can tell the kind of brains we carry in our heads because of the incredible abilities of savants, where there's some damage to the curtain or the wall or the genetic padlock that they put on the majority of our brain from usage. Now, science says, but we use all parts of our brain. It's been shown we use our parts of our brain. That thing about the 10%, that's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. Being able to use all parts of it and being able to have maximum efficiency are two very, very different things. We don't have maximum efficiency by a long shot. Some savants get incredible, some small part of their brains. But you add the 100+ savants that have been studied together, and you find those 100 different parts. If you were to just activate those 100 different parts in all of us, what would you have?
Yeah.
And then imagine a whole brain full like that of just those thousands of those abilities maximized. And I think that's what an Anunnaki brain is like.
Wow.
And we could have that one day when we get smart enough with genetics to make sure that that doesn't happen, to us. We learn how to be as smart as they were. Why not? Why not?
Yeah, and what you're saying reminds me of something that Ludwig von Mises, the European economist, said in one of his books. He said that all of mankind, for all the history that we know of, have always, are now, and always will support a dictator. It seems to be in our nature to want, collectively, all of us want to support a master, a god, or a dictator. And so we have always done that. We're doing it now. We always will, because it seems, he said, to be in our very nature to want to succumb to a master over us. I mean, and so once in a while you'll get someone breaks out like a Lloyd Pye or Zachariah Sitchin or what, and they're ridiculed because the masses, the herd mentality, wants to crawl on their knees to their masters. And well, it looks like this is probably genetically in us.
Jordan, when I lecture of late and write of late, what I've taken to calling it is the sheeple gene.
Yeah, you got it.
We have a sheeple gene inserted in us, and in most people, as it is with savants, with most of us, we have absolutely a nice, perfect curtain in our brains that block off the vast majority, and I think 10% is probably giving us credit. I imagine we use 5% or less of our total brain capacity. That's how badly I think they limited us, because we didn't need any more than that. If you consider what they are capable of, again, based on the evidence provided by the studies of savants. So the sheeple gene normally works right. Every once in a while, as it is with savants, there's a foul up, and somebody comes along with a very faulty sheeple gene. Now, Sitchin certainly had one. I have a very bad one. You have a bad one. Mm-hmm. There are those of us with faulty sheeple genes who just simply don't accept the word from above as being absolutely got to follow it, got to believe it, and all that. But most of us, the very vast majority of us, do. They have a fully functioning sheeple gene. They want to be told what to do. They don't want to think outside the box. That's uncomfortable. They want to watch Dancing with the Stars, and they want, watch those things and just not think about it. And that's the sheeple gene at work.
And that's why our masters make sure, one thing that our masters make sure is we have plenty of liquor stores on every corner, plenty of alcohol, and plenty of television and movies and theme parks, anything to keep the
distractions.
Well, keep the kids happy. Keep the kids happy. They're just a bunch of kids. Keep them all happy, and everybody will be happy. And we're talking scientifically. A long time ago, they put this into us to be a sheeple. That's why, like I said, it seems to be in our very nature as people.
It does. I agree. Again, that would be on the checklist. If you're going to build a slave and a servant, and look, if you believe Sitchin, and I do, there was a real serious debate about whether or not we should create a new sentient being on this planet. Number one, the vote was close, but the vote was in our favor, just as when it came time to destroy us with the flood, the vote was close against us. Mm-hmm. But, in the course of that vote, when you're sitting down and working out the list of things you want to put in your slave or make your slave do or be or whatever, one of them is we have to make them extremely obedient. We have to put a sheeple gene in there, whatever they called it. And they did. And they did. And most of us come out with a fully functional sheeple gene, which makes us pretty much unthinking worker drones. We don't like to think of ourselves as that way. We all think of ourselves as being independent and think for ourselves and can't be pushed around and can't be told what to do and all that, which is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
We are that way, most of us, collectively.
Yeah. Do you think these policymakers out there, these think tanks know this, and, with the public education system and certain ways that humans are brought up from birth to death, that there's a lot of that within our programming?
Well, it's certainly not encouraged. Just look, for example, at speaking of education, let's look at higher education. The PhD programs of our country, right? And I'm not saying this sour grapes. I didn't try for a PhD and didn't get it. I'm just not saying this is sour grapes at all. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. And it's really come clear to me as I've dealt with them over the last 14 years with the Star Child skull. When you go to college, any degree of independence you have can make it through getting a bachelor's degree. Okay, they hand those out pretty much like popcorn. You obey the rules, you go to class, you get your grades, you'll get a bachelor's degree. You start into a master's program, and you start showing some independence of thought. You start being the pain in everybody's behind in the classes there and the round tables there, and you start asking the uncomfortable questions, you're on your way out. You will not make it into a PhD program. If you do make it into a PhD program with an independent spirit, with an independent bent of mind, asking the uncomfortable questions, you will be washed out at that level. Mm-hmm. You make it through to get a PhD, you are a master of groupthink. You have a well-developed sheeple gene. You take instructions. You do what you're told. You obey the rules. And so we have our scientific elite who are the finest examples of sheeple genes that can be found, and good intellects. Mm-hmm. And so this is why they react so viscerally, really so viscerally, to people like me or you or mm-hmm. anybody else who challenges what they do. It's like, where do you get off? Where do you get off challenging anything about us? We know because we've been through the system and we all collectively have agreed this is the truth. And how can you challenge that? Well, this is just the way it has always been with authority. It's always going to be, because you can't get in a position of authority unless you are willing to toe the line and do what everybody tells you to do and play the game the way it's supposed to be played. And when everyone around you sees that you know how to play the game properly, well, then you move up the ladder.
Right. Let me throw in one more question in relation to this real quick. With all of this, we're going to have to go because we're running out of time, but I do want to ask you one thing. Given the understanding now that we have been created, but our creators look like us, or we actually look like them, is it possible that some of the people who are behind the powers that be, when we talk about the proverbial powers that be, who are making the decisions for the world, could it be that this is these Anunnaki, or these extraterrestrial ones who look like us? Because we've heard so many stories about, how these extraterrestrials look like humans.
The reptilians.
The reptilians or whatever. But the whole idea, I'm asking Lloyd, do you think that there's something to this idea that maybe the human race is being run at the very top by some of these entities who actually, in fact, were part of the creators of who we are?
I don't know. I can't say. I can't swear to it. But it's not impossible. Why would they, if people say, why did they leave? And Sitchin would always say, who says they did? And I kind of take that attitude, too. We can't really be sure that they did. I can say this, though. If indeed they are the, quote, heavenly ones or the angels, they have that glow about them. And this is something that people often forget relative to the Anunnaki. But they had a physical glow about themselves. They had a different kind of aura than we do. You could see that. Humans could see it. That's how you knew they were a god, and to be reverent to them. And I explain that. People say, well, how would that be? In their planet, Nibiru, it's most of its time out in very deep, deep space with no sun, no heat source. So it would have to have an internal heat source like we do. I mean, it's common to have internal heat sources with planets, so that's not the hard part. The hard part would be light. So what did they do for light? Well, I think that they had, like a couple of our planets do in our solar system, they had a kind of phosphorescent kind of glow to them. Mm-hmm. That their air, their everything had to have some kind of phosphorescent glow about it, so that there was very low light and they could see, they live their lives and have enough light coming off of that to allow their bodies to function. Otherwise, you have to explain it with they were part of a second sun, a smaller sun, and that there's a twin sun out there, and that Nibiru is not exactly like Sitchin described, but it is more like what Andy Lloyd talks about, a planet orbiting a smaller sun that comes through. Either way you look at it, they are going to be different than us physiologically and biologically to a certain degree that gives them a physical aura. They vibrate. Their bodies function biochemically at a different level than we do and give off that aura. So they would be hard to recognize if we saw one walking down. Excuse me, wouldn't be hard to recognize if we saw one walking down the street. You'd notice, oh boy, that guy looks like an angel. You know, with the halo and all that. That's where the halo came from. Mm-hmm. As much as there's so many halo stories of angels, not halos, but so many glowing stories of angels and all of that, I have to accept that is indeed how they looked. And if that's the case, then they would have to rule us in hiding to a degree. You couldn't have, maybe they shapeshift the way David Icke says. I don't know. But
I don't know either. But you're right. You know, anything's possible. And with that kind of technology, with a race that is far superior to us, who the hell knows? I mean, anymore. You know.
Exactly.
But anyway, thank you for being with us today, Lloyd, and we want to have you back again. This is an extraordinary science of how the human being got here. Who are we and where are we going, and who created us? That goes into theology, and that's another thing. I'd like to do another show with you just on theology, on the concepts of God and how, who created us, and we've already been talking about that, but that just opens up a can of worms. There's a lot more, because, to my mind, well, who created the Anunnaki? Where did they come from? And ultimately, how far back does this go? Because I've heard so many people who say they've been abducted, and they ask their abductors, these aliens, are you God? And the aliens always say, no, don't look at me. I'm not God. I'm just smarter than you are. But we're not the ultimate in the universe. So that's what we could talk all about that maybe another time, Lloyd. But I want to thank you for being with me, and I appreciate your work and what you're doing. And we're going to promote and tell everybody how to get to you and your books and materials. And then we're going to have you on the website, how to get to everything, your books and your materials and everything on our website. But for everyone listening, tell us where we can find you.
There are two places you go to. There's Lloyd Pye for the material we've been talking about, and I have an ebook called Intervention Theory Essentials, which is good and easy and cheap. And then I have a larger book, a book called Everything You Know Is Wrong, and both of those are available on Lloyd Pye, LLOYDPYE.com. And then for those who are interested in Star Child material, that we'll talk about another time, I'm sure, that would be www.starchildproject.com, and there's a book called The Star Child Skull and an ebook called The Star Child Skull Essentials, and both of those are very informative.
Good, and we're going to put all of that on the website with all of those connections and links and everything. Thank you again, Lloyd, for taking time and the way you did it, because this is kind of like a last-minute thing that we were able to get you together. But thank you again for doing that, and we'll get back to you, and let's do another show later. All right, thanks
guys.
again.
You guys have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.